citizens of Europe own everything in this building, that the Hungarian delegation is more or less exclusive use of this room, but you do have to squeeze in, so I'm sorry about that. A couple of things about myself. I lived in the UK for 54 years, but I had enough of it. Enough of London, enough of the UK, above all enough of the English, went home being Hungary. But I did work, and this I think is of relevance to you, as a journalist for 9 years. So I'm not completely green behind the ears when it comes. Admittedly, it was a long time ago. 67 to 76, I think. So before most of your times, I would hazard a guess, or at any rate, you were very small at the time. Now, my sense of it is, and I can't judge what you people write. I have great trouble in understanding what goes on in Denmark. Let me put it this way. It's not a completely impenetrable language, but it's not a language that I pretend to read. I can read Dutch with difficulty. I mean, the language I know is German, but Danish is just too different. A bit of Swedish, and well, I know quite a bit of Finnish and Estonian, but that's another story. So basically, I mean, the sense I have from the languages that I do read, which is primarily English, French, and German, obviously Hungarian, is that journalism has changed. Changed very markedly in all sorts of ways, which clearly, because this is not the journalistic training that I received, I don't like. Now, I don't know how many of you know this book. Has this been translated into Danish? Ulf Kotte is a German journalist. The book is called, I'm not sure what it's called in German. Gekaufte Journalisten, so purchased journalism. I haven't read it all, I just read it because I just received the copy. But basically, Ulf Kotte, who worked for the Frankfurter Allgemeine, makes it very clear that practically everything he did at the behest of the German government and secret services, and he was given instructions of what to write, and so on and so forth. So that doesn't mean that, it does mean to me that he, and I suspect he's not alone, German journalism doesn't come out of this too well. Or, I'm sure many of you look at The Guardian, paper that you love so much. There was a quite extraordinary piece, I think last week, I think on Wednesday, but perhaps I'm not sure, which claimed that there were work camps and internment camps for migrants, and indeed that Hungary was relaunching the death penalty. Now, this is not actually true, but that's all right, that's not the first time. Especially the Austrian, but the German, British, to some extent French press, will write things about Central Europe that they would dream of writing about their own countries. Well, these are faraway countries, we don't know very much about what goes on in them, we don't read the language, don't give a damn. Do you all know about a news agency called CEN? You really should. There's a big, long piece about it. I can email it to any of you if you're interested, which basically makes up news from obscure countries that nobody is ever going to check. Things like a two-headed goat was born in China. That's relatively painless. Or an Argentine teacher has sex with an underage pupil. That's a little tricky because it might. But the whole thing is it's fiction. But many of the British papers, and for all I know in other countries, simply print this without checking. And that's what I'm suggesting is that by now there is a kind of cleavage line between what papers, media will publish about their own country, which is relatively easy to check and is subject to libel laws, and countries which actually can't get back at you, but are somehow exotic. And you exoticize them, you make them as far away, as different, as distant as you possibly can, and you can write anything about them. Hungary has acquired, regrettably, a special role in this regard, in that an amazing, extraordinary phenomenon happened just about 5 years ago. A centre-right government got a 2/3 majority. Now, for anybody who's centre-left, this is outrageous. It's a scandal. It's the wrong side of history. You all know the expression, the wrong side of history, I take it. It's if history had sides. It's upper side, lower side, back side, who knows? But it's widely used. The President of the United States uses it. He thinks it means something. But in any case, there's a very, very strong sense on the part of Western Europe, West European journalists, West European politicians, think tanks, in a way the media elite, that something's gone seriously wrong in Hungary. Now, I happen to think that there are things that are wrong in Hungary. I'm not for 1 second saying that the country is perfect, but the things which are attributed, and I'm using the word attributions, every intention of using that word, are frequently exaggerated, incorrect, ill-intentioned, and Western journalists do not look at their sources with adequate scrutiny. It's the problem of the translator. How good is your source if you don't know the original language? The example I give on these occasions is, if somebody were to write a book about the United States without knowing English, would you take it seriously? If somebody writes a book about Hungary without knowing Hungarian, oh yes, that's all right then. So there is an inequality here, a gap, which clearly means that the Central European voice, and not just Hungary, but Poland, Czech, the Baltic states, is weak. It's weaker than the hegemonic voices of English, French much less than it was 30, 40 years ago, German coming up, Italian, Spanish somewhere behind us. So in a way, this is the context in which Hungary finds itself today. The government tries. I think that it's got a lot of very, very bad publicity, ill-intentioned. And then there is the standard way in which a country like Hungary, but many other countries are actually reported, is that the journalists will try to find balance. How do they find balance? Well, you talk first to the critics, you cite 3 critics, and then at the very end of the piece, by which time your reader gets very bored with it, they cite the government spokesman. The government spokesman, blah, blah, says such and such. So everybody's forgotten the story by that stage. The big impact is the first 2 paragraphs. I'm sure you all learned better journalism. So in a way, there's manipulation there, there's unreliability, and as far as Hungary is concerned, that's what I get from my constituents, anger. There's anger that we're being dissed. You all know this term, I assume, American street language, disrespect. And our capacity, our ability to say, look, listen to our voices, simply absent. You can all talk about the plurality of voices on the internet, but the plurality of voices on the internet in Hungarian are somewhat less plural than in other languages. My last sentence, does anybody know the name of Joris Leijendijk? No?
On who?
Joris Leijendijk. He's a Dutch journalist who worked in the Middle East. I think he knows Arabic. He wrote a very good book about the Middle East maybe 4 or 5 years ago, maybe 6. And he begins by saying, I wrote this book in English because if I had written it in Dutch, nobody would read it. If the second coming were to be announced in Dutch, nobody would know about it. And it's a similar situation. I don't imagine that your position is going to be all that different in Danish, but anyway, that's my introductory spiel. So the floor is yours.
Can I just ask you one question? What is the most wrong thing about Western press reporting about Hungary?
It's so difficult for me to limit it to one single fact. All facts are context dependent, and it's the entire context of Hungary which I think is seriously distorted. There are many things I haven't said, but let me add one other thing, which is that, and perhaps this is the single most important contextual proposition, is that Hungary is politically very, very deeply divided. It's very hard for an outsider to understand how deeply divided it is. Practically everything is understood in terms of left-right politics. I'm only exaggerating very slightly when I say there are left-wing restaurants and right-wing restaurants. The food may be the same. I do know a particular restaurant where the food is excellent, but it's clearly a left-wing restaurant. The owner spent time in Moscow. There are lots of photographs of him with I'm not sure who. And I feel slightly uneasy going there. They're not going to throw rotten eggs at me. I still feel this is an alien space. And then there are other places which are blazoned with photographs of Orban. Again, I can take you to one where I don't think left-wing people would be very happy. So that's the kind of thing I have in mind. But at the political level, it means that each side is determined and succeeds in saying the worst about the other, to which there is a very particular Hungarian quality. We exaggerate. We use spectacular language, which people, you don't notice it if you're speaking Hungarian, if you translate it into another language, it's horrific. And Western journalists hear the translation and say, oh really? Oh, wow, fantastic. There was a hearing here on Hungarian media, the very first, but maybe 6 years ago. Miklos Haraszti, who I go back a long time, know each other, he was in charge of media for OSCE for many years, and therefore he has the prestige. And he talked about the Hungarian media law being a torture chamber. Torture chamber, that sounds fine in Hungarian, you know, it sounds absolutely okay, but the moment you put it into English, it's absurd. But he didn't see the absurdity, and I'm sure there were people in the room who thought, oh my God, they really put journalists in a torture chamber? Well, that's terrible. And the government's only been in power for 6 months. They've set up, I mean, you know, you could see the way that kind of thinking goes. So these two factors, I would say, are the two that tend to push the depiction of Hungary in a direction that I think is a distorting lens.
Right. So the critique of the press laws in Hungary is based on wrong translations and misunderstandings from the West?
Not necessarily. It may just be that people are predisposed, I'm not saying everybody, people are predisposed to see a perfectly correct translation as meaning something much more than it really is, reading between the lines. You know, if they can say that much, then the truth must be, or if this is true, then this must necessarily follow. No, it doesn't. Absolutely not. But I don't know if any of you had a chance to look at the media law. It's been around for 4 years. Everybody, when it came out, said this is absolutely dreadful, journalists will be persecuted, torture chamber. Actually, it's not done anything, but the argument at the time was, well, it may be quite innocent, but actually what it could result in is such. Now that is stretching the reality, and that I think is widely used. But if this, then that must follow. No, it mustn't. There's no necessary connection between the two. And that's a journalistic technique which I'm sure many of you have encountered in your working lives.
But if, let's say, some people, and maybe that's the opposition then, but if they express concerns like that, then I guess isn't it fair enough to mention it?
So the opposition expects
Let's say,
concerns?
no, they express some, they're afraid that it might lead to this and this.
Yeah,
then
well,
it's in a way fair
that's
enough.
fine. You know, let them by all means do that, and that's a perfectly legitimate proposition. But then say, well, maybe not. That's all. You know, balance.
And you don't feel that balance is there.
I'm sorry?
And you really don't feel that balance is there at all.
I'm quite sure it isn't there. I mean, I could really look. Let me give you one example. I'll come back to you in a moment. The new Hungarian constitution came into force on the 1st of January 2012. Within a week, something like 15 articles appeared in various British papers, all containing the same data, including one particular datum that was wrong. They all said, all these highly knowledgeable people, that the new Hungarian constitution bans abortion. No, it doesn't. But they clearly got this material from